Welcome into the PFN Bengals Podcast. I am Dallas Robinson. He is Jay Morrison. Jay, we're back. We had a long hiatus. We both had our vacations. I wasn't sure if I was talking to Jay Morrison or George Hamilton here. You're so tanned and rested and recovered. How you doing, Jay? We got the first day of Bengals training camp and mock turtle soup. There's so much to get into, so much to talk to. But first of all, how you doing? We're back in the swing of things. Training camp's here. Season's right around the corner. How is Jay Morrison doing?
Doing well. It was a long hiatus, but it's never long enough. It feels like, wait a minute, we just left and now it's here. But it's exciting that it's here because you can talk about football. You don't have to just look for things. And I'm really looking forward to getting to the first practice on Wednesday and seeing some of these newcomers in a more competitive environment as opposed to what OTAs is. And so, yeah, it's great to be back. I hope you had a good break. I'm ready to get going again. I missed it.
I missed it too, and I did have a good break. I was in Las Vegas where it was 120 degrees every day, so a lot of indoor time. I didn't get the tan like you did, but I am rested and recovered. So it's good to be back. I'm excited for the season. I can't wait for things to get going again. And we had a ton of news yesterday, Jay. You were down at the stadium talking to Mike Brown and Zach Taylor and everybody, all the decision makers involved with the Bengals. And they were pretty forthcoming, I think, about a lot of different topics that we want to get into. I think first and foremost, what we have to talk about is Joe Burrow, obviously. Zach Taylor said that he has been totally cleared for contact after dealing with his wrist injury last year and throughout the offseason. He also announced at least his intent to play Joe Burrow and other starters during the preseason, which in the past the Bengals have not done. I think it's interesting, Jay, to hear them be so open, I think, about Burrow's health. And I think it has to give fans at least some confidence, right, that we're not talking in these hushed tones anymore about Joe Burrow's progress and what he's going to do. But the Bengals obviously have a plan for his recovery and how he'll participate throughout training camp. But I think the overall takeaway you have to have from yesterday's comments is just confidence about Joe Burrow, where he's at and how ready he is for the season.
Yeah. I mean, there was always that little doubt in the back of your mind where he's not throwing full speed at mini camp and he was taking the days off and they said they were scheduled, but you wonder because it's an injury that no quarterback's ever dealt with before. I think they eased some of those concerns. I think, Zach saying he's cleared for contact it means something that he is, but there's no contact in training camp. I mean, they wear orange jerseys. If you get anywhere near those guys, there's going to be trouble. But preseason games, that is full contact, and he is planning on playing him. And Zach, I asked Zach about it last year, and so I revisited the question this year, and that's when he said that. And last year it was more, we're open to it. Some of the veterans on the team had approached him about a desire to do it and shake off the rust. And he always listens to those, what the voices in the locker room, the big voices in the locker room. And I think maybe we might have saw it last year had it not been for Burrow's calf, because they did play the defensive starters last year. And then when Burrow went down, they didn't play the offensive starters. So the trend's just kind of coming back around. It used to be you thought you're never going to see starters ever again in the preseason, and teams are kind of leaning back into it. I think that the fact that he wants to play the starters in the preseason, it says a lot about his confidence and where Burrow is physically, and it says quite a bit about where he thinks this offensive line is. Where you don't, they're not. He's not going to be taking huge dropbacks and throwing bombs, but you don't want to expose to any unnecessary risk. And I don't think this is going to be just a cursory, one series, let him go out there and hand the ball off 4 times and maybe throw it once or twice. I think it's going to look more like a game. And I think there is a lot of trust in that offensive line to not get Burrow not just injured, but not even hit, nothing close in the preseason. So all of it's progress. It's you can't really measure it as it goes because you're not privy to the medical records and you're not privy. I mean, Burrow's never going to be 100% honest about how he's feeling. And he even said I'll keep that to myself when he was asked about the pain he felt in the wrist. But I think this is a good sign that it's where it needs to be. I don't know it's where it needs to be if the season opener was this weekend, but I think it's where it needs to be when you're looking at the season opener in whatever it is, 40 days.
Mm-hmm. And it's, Joe Burrow has played, 3 career snaps, I think, in the preseason, all in 2021. This is not something he's done, so this will be new. Zach Taylor was open about, he's still kind of deciding how much. He said, how much, how many games is to be determined. The schedule's a little quirky with a second and third game kind of being back to back, which is true. There's only, I think, 5 days because their third preseason game is a Thursday night.
A Saturday to Thursday, yeah.
So how much we really see Burrow, and if do we see him all 3 games, just 1 game? It's like Taylor said, it's all to be determined. And he also said training camp is long. Zach Taylor said one thing he's learned is to be proactive with managing. You'll never regret being proactive in the first week or 2 weeks of training camp. There's plenty of reps to go around. That's kind of my main takeaway, is that they will be cautious. That look, Joe Burrow is the highest paid quarterback in football. He is this offense. He is this team in so many ways. To hear that they'll be proactive and cautious, I think, but also expressing that confidence is what you want to hear, I think, at this point in the season. How preseason and training camp play out, to be determined, but we're hearing all the right things at this point in time.
Yeah, and I mean, remember last year when he got hurt and Jake Browning came in, and we talked about how valuable it was that Burrow was hurt in the preseason and he got all these reps. They realized that, and so you give Burrow a day off, and Jake can run with the wands for an entire practice. And I think there's some real value in that. So it's being proactive, it's being cautious, but I think it's also being smart and getting your backup quarterback some more reps, especially when you've got a new slot / tight end to have him develop some chemistry with, and Mike Gesicki, and you've got a 3rd round pick in Jermaine Burton. That's going to be important for Burrow to get out, or for Browning to get out there and throw some passes to those guys, and in case he is needed, and history suggests he might be needed at some point this season.
It's so funny where we were a year ago, Jay, talking about this backup quarterback battle and Trevor Siemian versus Jake Browning, and is it the worst situation in the NFL, and should they be going out and signing somebody? And now here we are and viewing Jake Browning as probably a top 5 NFL backup. Yeah. And not that it wouldn't be a huge downgrade, obviously, going from Joe Burrow to Jake Browning. But if anything happens, God forbid, for a game or two, we feel so much more confident about what this offense would be able to do if Joe Burrow did go down. So it's such a different situation than the Bengals were in last year. One other thing that was talked about yesterday by all the Bengals brass was Jamar Chase and his contract situation. I think Mike Brown had a lot of interesting comments, maybe some expected comments. Mike Brown saying we can't pay everyone, the pie is not going to grow. I probably could have written those comments out before Mock Turtle Soup happened yesterday, right? We know what Mike Brown is going to say, but he I think there's a willingness there. Obviously, Jamar Chase, it just feels like the contract is going to get done at some point. There's no way Jamar Chase is leaving Cincinnati, is being traded away from the Bengals. It's just a matter of the timeline, right? Is it going to happen before this season? That the odds of an extension getting done in season are slim to none. So is it going to be before this season, or is it going to be after this season? Which side wants it when? Does Jamar Chase, is he pressing for a new deal now? Or does he say, if I go out and have an all-pro season, I'm going to top Justin Jefferson as the highest paid wide receiver in the league? There's a lot of competing factors here, but I think what Duke Tobin said was really interesting too, that we'll see if we can get something done. We hope it can. I don't view people as receivers. I view them as individuals. And I think there's a lot of pros to having a Jamar Chase. I don't call him receiver. I call him Jamar Chase. I don't really know what that means, but he's, I think the extension will get done. It's just a matter of when. And Jay, I don't know about you. My bet is that this deal will not get done before the beginning of the season. I would put almost every dollar I have that this deal will wait until the offseason.
No, because if you kind of I agree with you. If you read between the lines and some of the things that Mike said, and he said something along the lines of, apparently what other people make matters, and it's like, yeah, of course it does. So if he's already looking to be the highest paid receiver in the league, I don't think the Bengals are ready to go there yet, and they don't have to go there yet. And Mike mentioned that we've got him under contract for 2 more years. He was sending a clear message there that they have the leverage. And I think the Bengals would like to get it done now at their price. But the big question here is, yes, I think it gets done. Ultimately, it's how quietly does it get done? If this starts dragging it late into training camp next year and into the preseason, and does Jamar likes to talk. And he's very open and he's very honest. And we saw that change a little bit. He did not want to talk to reporters during minicamp and during OTAs this year. And he said he would talk to us at training camp. So, we'll see if he holds true to that. But if they stay far apart, I could see his agent leaking some things to the national guys, and Jamar maybe making some comments, and that's not the way the Bengals like to do business, and that's probably not the best way to proceed. And I don't know that it would ever come to any kind of holdout or anything like that, but I am interested to see how this is going to play out. Burrow, that one, both sides just kept that as close to the vest as possible. Maybe Jamar learned from that, and that is the best way to go. But it's just not Jamar Chase's nature to stay quiet. So if I'm betting on it, I would say late August, early September next year. They're going to try to take it down as close to the deadline as possible of that regular season, which is not an actual NFL deadline, but it's just kind of a de facto. Nobody wants to negotiate in season, and they don't have to. I mean, they don't have to get it done by then, but it would behoove both sides to just get it out of the way before next season starts.
Especially after the T. Higgins saga and how that's gone, and the trade request, and the Trey Hendrickson trade request, even if that was kind of fictitious or whatever. Just that the Jesse Bates situation a couple of years ago, I think. There's just this kind of idea that every Bengals negotiation outside of a Joe Burrow has to be a struggle. And it doesn't have to be that way. Other teams don't necessarily go that way and make everything difficult. I think that a deal will get done. And I just think that there's too much willingness from both sides, right? The Chase and his team know that the Bengals have so much leverage, but the Bengals know that they need Jamar Chase too. And they know T. Higgins is not going to be here for the long term. So I think I would put the same timeline as you, that this time next year is far more likely than any time the next few weeks to get a deal done for Jamar Chase. And if he goes out and balls out like we think he will, I think he will be the highest paid wide receiver. He has no hope of doing that at this point in time. There's no reasonable way that his agency could say he deserves more than Justin Jefferson based on how their careers have gone. But depending on how this 2024 season goes, I think he could get there, especially if the cap goes up next year. I think he could get there ahead of Jefferson and take that moniker as the highest paid wide receiver in the league.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing too, the kind of the variable in all this is, you mentioned that the T. Higgins situation, and he didn't get paid. And the whole time these two guys have been here together, they've been 1 and 1A, and they've been on equal footing, and they've been peers. And now all of a sudden you go out and make Jamar Chase one of the highest paid receivers in the league when you refuse to pay Chase. I just think that creates a weird dynamic in that locker room that they would like to avoid. And just play things out this year, let T test the market next year, see where he goes, and then you lock in on Jamar. I mean, Jamar's leverage goes up once T leaves, but sure. I think the Bengals are prepared for that. And I think that might be a way that they were looking at it to let's not create that weird dynamic between two of your best players at the same position.
So Chase, I think, is the highest priority in terms of an extension long term. But I think in the near term, it sounds like it's Evan McPherson is an extension right around the door, right? I mean, we've talked about that, Jay, on the show, that Evan McPherson is due an extension, that he very well could become the highest paid kicker in the league based on how the kicker market's gone, based on his production through his first few years of his career. Duke Tobin said, I think there's a possibility that a McPherson extension could come together. It could come together as we're talking here. It could come together next week. It could come together never. Is that a big enough window between 10 seconds from now and 10 years from now? I don't know what it is about NFL coaches and GMs that the way they remember when Kyle Shanahan was talking about injury reports and said, well, he'll be playing the next week if we're here, if the world still exists next week. Like, what is this long view that NFL decision makers have? I don't really understand it, but I think an Evan McPherson extension makes all the sense in the world. And we talk about these extensions being combative or hard to negotiate. I have to think a kicker extension is not that way. That this has to be the easiest extension you could find. Most kicker deals are same length, same sort of pay scale, $4 or $5 million a year. I think you probably look at the top highest paid kicker, which I think is Justin Tucker. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I think you look at that deal, change out the name, swap out a few numbers to account for the cap increase, and get a few signatures and make sure that Evan McPherson is your kicker for the next few years. This one doesn't seem that difficult to me to finalize.
Yeah, and even, I mean, I'm my guess, I'm not privy to the negotiations, but my guess is the Bengals would maybe like to go 3 as opposed to 4 or 5 years. I think Evan should want that too. I mean, he's, of all these high paid kickers, he's one of the youngest ones, and those skills don't erode in 3 years. So he could have another bite at the apple in just a few years. And I think it was telling that Duke said it could happen as we're speaking, because that tells you they're close. They're negotiating. It won't surprise me if I get a notification right here on this phone before we finish this show. I thought it could have come yesterday, and they do like to make these kind of moves the day before camp starts. I expect the team to announce a few signings today to get them to 90. And maybe the Evan McPherson extension is part of that. They already got Ted Karras out of the way. Jamar seems to be kicked down the road. This is the only one that they are probably really dialed in on. And like you said, it's almost a template. It's going to be $5.5 million, 3 years, maybe 4. No reason for this to drag out and just get it done. And maybe we'll get Evan McPherson at the podium right after Joe Burrow tomorrow.
So I pulled up the top kicker contracts. Justin Tucker is tied for number 1 at $6 million a year. Also tied for number 1. I hate to say it, Bengals fans, but it's Jake Elliott, former Bengal who got away too soon. He's also at $6 million. Justin Tucker has the highest fully guaranteed cash outlay at $14 million. So that's probably what the Bengals are looking at, something in that $6.5 million range if a deal does come together in these next few days or weeks. I don't know if there's anybody else, Jay, on this roster that you think could be up for an extension, right? We had the Ted Karras 1-year deal. Yeah. I don't know, like BJ Hill's a pending free agent. Mike Hill's a pending free agent. Most of these other guys I think that are just on 1-year deals, maybe someone like Osai, but I don't think there's anybody else. I think that the Bengals are desperate to extend any of these veterans. Like, I'm sure they love Mike Hilton, but he's 30 years old, Yeah. I think they're probably looking to replace him this year or next. So I think getting McPherson done and again, the outside chance of Chase, that's probably the business the Bengals have left over these next few weeks, I think.
Yeah, I'd be stunned if anything happened with BJ Hill. I mean, they drafted 2 defensive tackles with their first 4 picks this year. And Osai, they're going to let that play out. He's either going to price himself out of their range or he's going to play himself out of their interest. I think this is his last ride with the Bengals too. So I'm with you. It's McPherson and then minuscule chance it's Chase.
Yeah. The other thing that Duke Tobin talked about was the idea of signing a veteran free agent. Now, he was mostly talking about cornerbacks, right? That he was asked, are they going to sign a veteran to add to that young cornerback group? Duke Tobin's response was, are we going to sign a veteran? No, probably not. I like what we've got there. We've got young guys that can run and cover and who have a lot of upside. We've got some new guys working in there. It'll be exciting to see how they do. Do I feel like we have an immediate need for a veteran to make our team? No. That sounds pretty definitive to me. I'm curious how open they are to that changing once they get into training camp, once they see DJ Turner and see how Dax Hill is truly doing in that transition from safety to corner. Does that change at the cornerback position? Do they want to get another veteran in there? Does that change at backup offensive line? Do they want to get somebody else to compete with Matt Lee and Nate Gilliam to take those other spots? Does that change at running back, right? Where Zach Moss and Chase Brown look like the plan, but it feels like there's a room for another player there. Duke Tobin said no, that they're not interested. I'm just wondering your opinion, Jay. Like, do you think there's an openness to that changing a few weeks from now? Are we going to look back in a couple of weeks and say, oh, no, they definitely need to go out and sign Xavier Howard or Patrick Peterson or someone like that? Do you think that this could change?
I think it could change, but I think the only thing that's going to change, it's an injury. I don't think you're going to see Dax Hill and DJ Turner play so poorly that they're going to rethink it and then go get somebody. I think that what that was an endorsement of those two guys and Josh Newton, the rookie. I mean, they really liked what they saw from him early on. And so I think it's a risk. It would not cost that much money to go get one of these veterans. And it kind of goes back to what I talked about with receivers. Are they concerned about the dynamic in the room and the position group? And you bring a veteran like that in, a veteran's going to be thinking he's going to be the starter. He's going to have a chance to play. And he's I guess you talk these things out before you sign them, but still you bring a veteran in and he gets beat out by Turner and Hill, and then it becomes a whole thing. And so I just think that they're laying back and saying, we're not going to do it until we have to do it. Right now, they don't have to do it. It probably would be smart to do it. I think they need that insurance policy there. We saw what that secondary did to derail the season, even with Burrow's injury and the other things that went on. if that defense is better, they're probably a playoff team last year. So, yeah, I think they should go get one of those guys. And I do think, like I said today, before camp starts, I think they will sign some veteran free agents at other positions. Maybe not big splash names, but just to an interior offensive lineman, whatever it might be, just to kind of round out those positions, get them to 90. There's no reason not to be at 90 going into camp. You need camp bodies. But yeah, I don't know. That was one of the most surprising things. Number one, that Duke was so open about it. And number two, what his answer was, because it just felt like, yeah, that was the position where they were going to go get a veteran. And he said pretty much, nope, not interested.
I mean, you could see both sides. I think, was it Bill Parcells that used to call veterans, like adding a veteran in front of a young player, he would call them progress stoppers, right? Yeah. Like you want DJ Turner and Dax Hill preferably to win those jobs. These are young guys. They've got years left on their rookie contracts. They're cheap, affordable. You want these guys to be your cornerstones. You're right. If you go out and sign Dory Jackson, even if you sign him for $2 or $3 million, in his back of his mind, he's a starting player. He's been a starter for 5, 6, 7 years at a high pay rate. You're right that there's that personality conflict. I do think that you kind of maybe have to overlook that and say, we are in a Super Bowl or bust type of season here. Let's plan for every contingency. If Ted Karras goes down, do we really want Matt Lee as our starting center, a 7th-round rookie on a potential Super Bowl team? Or do we want to go out and get a guy like Mason Cole or even a Connor Williams who's still out there to be a center? It's a worthwhile question. And it's not like the Bengals don't have the money, right? They have the money. And guys who sign at this point are not signing for $10 million. They're signing for $1, $2, $3 million at best. I do think you're right, Jay, that guys that we talked about, like Adoree Jackson and Xavier Howard and Patrick Peterson, even if they think there's an opening on a team like the Bengals where they could come in and win a job, I do think that they're better off waiting for an injury elsewhere around the league where they could get a better opening. Like why come here and try and fight a couple guys for a starting job when unfortunately we know there will be injuries around the league. We know teams will need more depth. They can probably wait for the opportunity. So I think that does make some sense. And what you said about the personality stuff too, like you not only would you be wary that a guy like Adoree Jackson or Xavier Howard would want to come in and be a starter, but you want to give Turner and Hill the confidence and maybe say, hey, we don't have a veteran breathing down your neck. So there's competing viewpoints and I can see both sides, but I think it does make some sense of why they want to at least give these young guys the chance to shine before they go out and get somebody else. Yeah.
And especially with Turner and Hill, where you want that to be an apples to apples battle this year. And you want them to have equal reps at the one with the ones. And that just doesn't leave a lot of room for a veteran. He's not going to get that shot to really even compete with the ones. He's going to be running with the 2s and 3s. So I get where they're coming from, but I don't know. I like insurance. I do too. Having a fallback plan.
I like accounting for every single possibility. And if it were me, I would be considering some of these options, but I can get why they're not. Last thing we're going to talk about here, Jay, let's talk about these training camp battles. I mean, this Bengals roster, I feel like it is pretty solidified. It's not a team where there's a ton of starting jobs up for grabs, right? For the most part, we know who a lot of these 22 starters are going to be, but kind of beneath the surface, there are some spots, I think, where it's interesting, where we could look at some competition throughout camp and see who's going to emerge. Let's just go back and forth here and kind of go through our most interesting battles. I'll start with the one we just talked about. I think is the most obvious is CB2, DJ Turner versus Dax Hill. I'm very curious to see how this plays out. I think DJ Turner had some flashes last year, but also had quite a few lapses in coverage. I'm concerned about him kind of in man coverage, like whether he can play man coverage. Steven Ruiz from The Ringer, I've heard him on a few podcasts this offseason say that he specifically does not believe DJ Turner can play man coverage in the NFL. We'll see how that plays this year. But to see Dax Hill come in and try and take that outside corner role, I think it's going to be fascinating. I think it's going to be one of the most interesting position battles the Bengals have had in quite a few preseasons, to see 2 early round picks from the same college trying to compete for this starting job. And maybe it turns into a rotation where they're both seeing time during the year. We've seen that the Bengals before, but I am really, really excited to see this battle play out over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I am too. And it was funny because what you mentioned with the man coverage, where Duke mentioned that unprompted a couple times yesterday. He was kind of poo-pooing what he saw from Dax in OTAs. He's like, it doesn't matter. He's running. There's coaches out there that he's playing against. They had no competitive periods. And he said, I know Dax Hill can man cover. We saw it in college. We've seen it in the NFL. And so I do think that is the big issue. And that's where it's going to fall. And, you mentioned it earlier. Mike Hilton's getting up there. And if he misses time, one of those guys can slide in and probably would be ahead of Jalen Davis to be the backup slot. So
if that happened, you think Dax would slide inside and then DJ Turner would just play outside? You think that'd be the most if it
happened later, if Dax already wins the outside job, I think DJ would be the one that would play inside.
So? Okay.
But I don't know. Maybe they would go with Jalen Davis just because he's done it before, and they would rep DJ Turner in practice and see where he fit there. But yeah, I think that we're going to see Dax win this job, and it's going to be an interesting competition because it is, like I said, apples to apples. And I think we're going to see a lot of the first team reps with those guys splitting them. The one that I'm most interested in, I don't know where that's going to be the case. That was my specific question to Dan Pitcher was, everybody talks about it being an open competition with our Amarius Mims and Trent Brown for that right tackle job. It's like, how do you do that? Trent is a veteran. Do you just run him with the ones and let him get chemistry with that line, assuming that's going to be it? And then if Amarius starts looking good with the twos, he starts working his way in, or are they going to split time with the one? And he didn't really get into that. He said that, he's going to get his shot is basically what he said. But he had this huge smile on his face when he was talking about Amarius Mims. And Duke Tobin said that he's like, we drafted him at 18 and you look at his physical profile, everything about him, that's a guy you get in the top 5 of the draft. And so they're just, as much as they wanted to downplay what they saw from Dax and OTAs, they are thrilled about, and Zach Taylor was raving about Amarius Mims too, where just the way he was day to day and the way he prepared and the way he studied and the way he asked questions and the fact that if he is a backup, he's a backup to 2 guys that look exactly like him and kind of learn from them as far as the specific skill set for a body type that size. And I feel like they are really high on him, and it would not surprise me to see him beat out Trent Brown for that job. And that's going to be really interesting for me to see is what kind of opportunity he actually gets. How soon do we start seeing Mims rotate in there with the ones?
And Zach Taylor said it yesterday. He said that they talked to Trent Brown before they signed him, that there is a definite possibility we take a round 1 tackle. And he said, Zach Taylor said, that brings out the competitor in everybody. You can imagine what Trent Brown's response was. Fine, I'll be the best there is. That's great competition, great for everybody. We need all the depth we can get up front. He wouldn't call it a problem. It's a great situation to have. I agree. I think it is a great situation. Do you think if something happened to Orlando Brown, is Mims the next guy up at left tackle, or I wonder if they slide Trent Brown to left tackle and play Mims on the right side?
That's a good question.
We're getting into a lot of contingencies here about stuff we hope that does not happen, obviously.
You're going to send fans into a panic here. Like, wait a minute. We weren't.
I'm just asking the questions. That's all I'm doing. I just want to know what's going on.
I don't know I don't know early on if you'd feel comfortable with either one of those guys at left tackle.
No, I think you're probably right. I think it would be Trent Brown. I think if it happened early, just because he's played there, but maybe long term, maybe it would be Mims. My next one, I think, is wide receiver 3. I just think this is a really fascinating battle because it's wide receiver 3 for now, but it's wide receiver 2 for the long term, right? Is it, can Jermaine Burton become that guy? Can Andre Yoshivas become that guy? Does Charlie Jones have something that he hasn't shown? How much is Trenton Irwin going to be involved? Is Mike Gesicki the real wide receiver 3? Is he the big slot? Is he going to be the 3rd highest target player? We don't know. I think this one's pretty wide open. Listen to guys like Matt Harmon, who does excellent work over at Reception Perception. He is all over Jermaine Burton as a guy who should have been drafted in round 1. That, if not for the personality stuff, that he is a absolute first-round talent. It's tantalizing to hear that, I think, especially from a guy like Matt who knows wide receivers better than anybody. I'm just curious, how it all goes. How does Jermaine Burton, a guy who fell in the draft for a reason, now that stuff's really getting going, now that it's time to play ball, how does he react out there on the field and off? Does Andre Yoshivas have the the leg up because he was here last year and showed a lot. I think it's a really interesting battle. Again, I think it could be something that turns into a rotation where maybe it's not like one of these guys is the definitive wide receiver 3, but I think the ability to have a lot of different guys who can fill that role actually is interesting too. So how it all kind of plays out is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, Burton looked great in the offseason, but who doesn't look great running routes on air? It's going to be really interesting to see when it gets competitive, those competitive one-on-one periods, the 7-on-7, the 11-on-11, all that. And then not just how he competes, but how they use him. How much is he in the slot? How much do they put Jamar in the slot, move him around? And then when Jamar goes in the slot, who's that outside guy? Is it Yoshivas? Is it Burton? How quickly does he build or hamper trust with Joe Burrow? I mean, he's got to be sharp on those routes, and he's got to be good with his hands. So yeah, all of that. I mean, my eyes are going to be on Jermaine Burton a lot. Early in camp, middle of camp, late camp. I mean, he's one of the most fascinating guys for me to watch once this thing gets going tomorrow.
And I think related to that too, and maybe not something we would see in training camp, maybe in the preseason, but how the different personnel groupings that the Bengals use this season is something I'm really going to watch. Like they've got all these tight ends now. They're maybe not as married to 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver personnel as they've been in the past. How they kind of get all these guys involved, I think, and maybe that's not something we can see until the preseason or even until week 1, but just to see a little bit of a difference in the offensive game plan is something I'm definitely going to be watching. Jay, give me one more another training camp battle that you're interested in on this roster.
I love the punter battle. I know that some people might be like, yeah, whatever. And some people are just fed up with Brad Robbins and they want to see what Austin McNamara can do. You mentioned it, the quote that Zach had about competition brings out the best in everybody. And Brad Robbins has been open. I did a story on him earlier in the offseason about how he's relishing this competition. He wants to prove he can be this guy, and he knows he wasn't good enough last year. And I think you're going to see it. I think you're going to – that's not going to be a lesser of two evils kind of thing where they like, well, we got to take one of them. I think you can see both those guys perform really well in training camp, in the preseason games, and make this decision very hard for Zach and for Darren Simmons. So it's special teams isn't usually the most exciting. Practice alone isn't that great to watch. Yeah. At times, especially special teams. But this year with the kickoff return, the new rules, and then this punter battle, I don't think we're going to be taking a lot of sitting down and staring at our phone breaks during practice. There's going to be a lot to watch in every period in these practices.
No, I'm expecting you out there on the sidelines with your stopwatch clocking hang times on these guys. That's the data we need. I want every punt needs to be clocked. I want it in a spreadsheet, uploaded every day to the PFN Slack, just so we can track this battle in a good way. No, I think you're right, and I think along those same lines is the return man battle, right? We don't know how this is going to look. I've gotten so many questions this offseason about how these kickoffs are going to look. What is the approach going to be for special teams coaches and units around the league? Is it going to be more like actual offensive plays? And who's going to be the guy handling the ball for the Bengals? Is it Charlie Jones? Is it Travion Williams? Chris Evans? If those guys even make the roster, somebody that we're not even thinking of. How Darren Simmons chooses to attack and strategize, I think, with these new rules is going to be very interesting. And I think maybe we'll see that in training camp. Maybe in some of the joint practices, we could see some work on that and see some interesting plays or formations. And then definitely once the preseason gets started, to see what their plans are. Darren Simmons is one of the most experienced special teams coordinators in the NFL. Mm-hmm. I think he's got some ideas, I would guess, on how to attack this new strategy.
Yeah, and he mentioned that he thinks these kickoff returns are going to look a lot like punt returns because, you're not going to, it's going to be tighter spaces, and the recovering team is going to be on you quicker. And they like what they saw from Charlie Jones. He had that 81-yard touchdown in week 2 last year, and then he breaks his thumb in week 3 and he missed some time and just really kind of took some time to catch back up. But I would expect him to be the punt returner, and then you're going to need 2 kick returners. You're going to have to put one back on either side of the field just to prevent the team from kicking it the other way. So I would expect him to be 1 too. Now, maybe if he steps up and wins that wide receiver 3 job, maybe that changes and they try to lighten his load. But I think he's he's the leading candidate to be the main guy on both kickoff and punt returns. But they've got some other interesting options you could put back there, and we'll see how it evolves. I mean, maybe they want to go in a different direction once they see how all this starts playing out with that new kickoff rule.
When I play Madden, I only play as the Bengals, and I use DJ Turner as my return man because he has 98 speed. So just saying, Bengals, that's an idea. If you want to throw it out there, feel free to take that from me. Another battle I'm interested in, we talked about a little, is running back. It's hard to call any running back competition a battle, quotes, because hardly any team is using a true workhorse running back anymore. Zach Moss, Chase Brown, they're both going to see quite a few snaps, I would guess. I do think there's room for another running back on this depth chart. I did an article yesterday at PFN about some training camp trades we could see. I proposed old friend Samaje Perine coming back to Cincinnati. Now, I think the Bengals could easily wait to see Samaje Perine get cut in Denver. They've got a 4-way running back battle. I think Perine is the most likely to get cut. The trade I proposed was one of these late round pick swaps, future 7th for a 6th type thing. Not really giving up much, but I do think Perine could be an interesting option as a third down back. Jay, at PFN, we got true media access yesterday, so you better watch out for Dallas. It has stats now that I have access to this. Well, one thing I was looking up was third down snaps by running backs. Rashad White from the Buccaneers led the NFL with 198, but there are some interesting guys still available that play a lot of third down work. Jerick McKinnon for the Chiefs, 135 third down snaps. Latavius Murray, 120 for the Bills. Even Perine got 133 with the Broncos last year. If that's the type of guy the Bengals want, a guy who can catch a little bit, who can pass block, I really do feel like Perine's kind of the perfect fit for this team. Your thoughts on a running back? I mean, do you think Brown and I love Zach Moss. I was all over Zach Moss. I was very happy the Bengals signed him. I think this group can get it done, but I do think there's room for one more guy. Wouldn't be surprised if Perine's that guy.
Yeah, because if Chris Evans doesn't show himself as a capable kick returner, I don't know that they have any interest in keeping him. He's just not shown anything as a running back, and outside of that being a very thin position, that might be the only thing keeping him here. So if they could go get a guy like Perine, whether he gets cut in Denver, or, whatever the situation is, they love Perine. I mean, they tried to keep him here. They offered him the same amount of money, and he just opted to go to Denver. He maybe wanted to get out of Joe Mixon's shadow. He's played with him since college. I don't know what it was, if he just wanted the fresh start, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all to bring that guy back. They loved everything about him. Would he want to come back here? I don't know. That's sometimes guys don't like to circle back on those kind of situations. But as far as we're talking about the 3 openings, that would be a position. Interior offensive line running back, I think, are the 2 leading candidates that we're going to see them sign today when they get to the 90-man limit.
Perine, I do think you mentioned being out of Joe Mixon's shadow. I think that's a great point. The fact that Mixon not here, I wonder if he'd be more willing to come back. Sure, he'd probably be viewed as the third running back, but it's Zach Moss and Chase Brown. It's not, franchise stalwart Joe Mixon ahead of him. So I think that's interesting. I just do think he is a good fit for this roster if and when he gets cut, which I do think he will. You mentioned the backup at interior offensive line. I think that's another area we should all be watching. Amarius Mims and Cody Ford are locks, I think, as backup offensive linemen, obviously. But beyond that, Jackson Carman, Dante Smith, Trey Hill, Matt Lee, Jackson Kirkland. What's it look like? What does that group look like? Who are the top backups beyond Mims and Ford? I'm not, again, another area where I think they could sign a veteran if they're not happy with especially how the interior looks throughout training camp. But I'm just curious to see who emerges from that group. My money's on Matt Lee. I mean, I really do think he's got a good inside chance of becoming one of the top interior players, but I think there's a few openings there for guys, maybe whether it's Gilliam or Kirkland. There's an opening for someone we're not thinking of to make this roster.
Yeah, I mean, they let Sharping go, and he was with kind of that sneaky backup center. If that had been the case, you wonder. It's like if anything does happen to Karras, do you want to trust that position to a rookie in Matt Lee? And it's like, well, if it's not him, you're still trusting either Nate Gilliam, who's never played in the league, or you're trusting Trey Hill, who was a disaster in his chance to play as a rookie, and now he's been here a few years, but he's not played. So, I think that would be they are really high on Matt Lee. For a 7th round pick, they feel like they got him a few rounds later than he should have gone. But again, it's an insurance policy, and that would not be a case where you would be upsetting anything. That to bring in another veteran I mean, my God, if you're Matt Lee, why would you not? It would be tougher, but why would you not want to be able to learn from Ted Karras, who's already an elite leader, and then another veteran? It would just serve you well. And he's a 7th round pick. Even if he got cut, I'm sure the Bengals would bring him back, have him on the practice squad, be a whole nother year, or be a redshirt year of seasoning. But I think you're in a very dicey position if anything happens to Ted Karras.
And some of the guys we've talked about that are still out there, Mason Cole, who started a bunch of games in the division for the Steelers, Connor McGovern, longtime starter. There are guys out there on the interior offensive line if they want to go find somebody. Quick thing on the offensive line I want to talk about. Amarius Mims, literally the last rookie to sign his deal in the entire NFL. Any thoughts on why that happened? I mean, the usual explanations for stuff like this are offset language in a rookie contract or signing bonus payment schedule, stuff like that. The Vikings were late on signing their picks. They were late on signing J.J. McCarthy, which led to them being late on signing Dallas Turner, who was chosen 1 pick before Mims. Surely that had an effect on Mims' contract and what he was expecting. But just interesting, I think that Mims was literally the last guy to sign of all 256 or whatever rookies there were.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was the guy right ahead of him hadn't signed. Part of it was they were working on Ted. They're working on Evan. They were, I'm sure, negotiating, working on Jamar, even if they're not close. And I don't know. I've not heard this from anybody, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did come down to the guaranteed money, where the Bengals would probably prefer to spread that out, and Amarius and his agent would probably want that all up front. So it's one of those things where it's not a big deal. I had zero doubt that this was going to be done before the first day of training camp practice. And, I wasn't surprised at all that it happened yesterday. I don't think it's a big deal. I didn't think it was a big deal when it still was unsigned, but that's probably what it was either maybe offset language, but even that, it's like, that's a bad thing to negotiate for a player. We're like, well, if you guys cut me, that just shows they don't have faith in their own ability. So I would guess, just knowing how the Bengals are with guaranteed money and how they're trying to move some stuff around to get ready for this major Jamar contract, that probably was what it was. What we talked about before with him possibly winning this starting job, I went and I looked, and so since 1970, the Bengals have had 16 rookies start the season opener as a rookie on the offensive line. A tackle hasn't done it since some guy named Anthony Munoz in 1980. I mean, Cordell did it in 22 at guard. Michael Jordan did it in 19 at guard. Billy Price at center in 18, Russell Bodine at center in 2014, and Zeitler in 12, Bowling in 11. So there's been some recent history of rookies starting the opener, but not at tackle. And so it's one of those things where if it's an even battle at all, I think they're going to lean towards Trent Brown in the opener, but that would be a heck of a feather in Amarius Mims' cap if he can win that starting job and say he's the first one to do it for the Bengals since Anthony Munoz.
Doing anything like Anthony Munoz, I think, is a good plan for Amarius Mims. Any other battles that we should look at, Jay, for training camp? A couple other ones I was thinking about. I don't think safety's a battle, like Von Bell and Geno Stone are locked in, but no pun intended, how much does Jordan Battle play? How much work does he get? Is that third safety? And then again, not really a battle because I think it'll be a rotation, but how does the defensive line rotation look? How does it stack up? Are they going to be able to get a breakout season from Miles Murphy and let Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard play less snaps? How does Joseph Osai kind of recover after a lost season? How do the rookie defensive tackles fit in? Is Chris Jenkins a 600 to 700 snap player that can let Rankins and Hill get a little bit of a breather? Do they trust McKinley Jackson as a nose tackle in year one? What does Zach Carter do? Does he do anything? Is he still on this roster?
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of questions, I think, at that group. And even if everybody is going to get time, just what does the plan look like? Any are you interested in those or any other battles I think that we should be looking at before training camp really gets going here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm writing a piece right now on the 5 biggest wild cards for the team in training camp, and 2 of them were right there. I've got Von Bell because they signed him to play safety, but they also signed him to coach safety. And once he comes in here and gets everybody on that same page, he's getting up there. He's going to be 30 pretty soon. And Jordan Battle was coming on last year, and it would not surprise me to see Jordan Battle eventually win that job and beat out Von Bell. And then it just slipped my mind Osai. Joseph Osai was my other one, because he could really it's his contract year, and he's going to be a free agent in 2025. And this is the first healthy offseason, and the coach has been raving about nobody's worked harder and nobody's looked better in the offseason than Joseph Osai. So he's got a lot on the line. And how does it look? I mean, are they not benching? Are they resting Hubbard and Hendrickson and then going with Murphy and Osai as the edges? Or is Osai going to keep kicking inside on third downs and rushing from inside there? I'm really interested to see, number one, what his usage is, and number two, what his production is. Because he's got it. There is a huge variance on how this year could go. And I do have Joseph Osai as one of my biggest wild cards in training camp.
Yeah, I wish we could somehow magically look to the end of the season and see what this defensive end snap count looks like. Yeah. I would not be surprised if definitely Myles Murphy plays more snaps than Sam Hubbard this year. I would not be surprised by that at all. Maybe Joseph Osai too. I think Sam Hubbard took a step back last year, getting a little older. I think
he was hurt too.
He was hurt too. I do think there's a chance that Murphy just kind of takes that role away from him, and that Hubbard becomes more of a kind of a tertiary player. But I do think that all these guys will get time, and I'm just curious to see how this kind of works out as this summer progresses. I think that's all we've got for today. It's great to be back talking to you all. I'm sure we'll do some mailbags coming up in these next few weeks and see what you guys want to talk about from a Bengals perspective. But like we said at the top, we're just excited for football to be back. I mean, I've been going on to NFL Game Pass and just throwing up random Week 8 games just to get a sense of football back in my life. Like I just want to watch anything. I'm watching random Seahawks, Rams games from Week 8 or whatever. I just can't get enough. Jay, anything else before we sign off on this kind of comeback edition of the PFN Bengals pod?
Well, we don't need to talk about it, but it's going to be talked about elsewhere. The Bengals just tweeted a picture of Joe Burrow arriving at camp. And yes, he doesn't just have a buzz cut. It is dyed bleach blonde. It is a totally new look for him. I'm sure that question is going to come up when we talk to Burrow after practice tomorrow.
Wow. I just pulled up the picture. That's a look. I will say that is a look. Bright red. Is that red, pink, magenta? I don't know what color you would call that T-shirt he's got on. This is he kind of looks like a supervillain a little bit, which I wouldn't say is like the word. That's kind of a good look, I think, for an NFL quarterback. But yeah, that's an interesting look for Mr. Burrow.
I thought everybody saw the video where he had the buzz cut, and I was like, he wants to be all business, and he got a lot of grief about the Paris runway, and he was getting teased a little bit about his hair on the podcast he did with Pardon My Take, and I thought that was a good sign. He's like, I'm just going to shave it off and be all business, but then to do the bleach blonde look is just, I don't know, it kind of contradicts that. It's an interesting choice. I will say that.
He looks a little like Dwight Schrute in the first season of The Office when he dyed his hair bleach blonde to get something with Jim. I forget what the prank was, but yeah, I will see how long that lasts. How long does it take for that to wash out or grow out? I don't know if he starts to regret that. I don't know. Maybe he wears a helmet professionally, so who really cares, right? At the end of the day, it's okay. Jay, as long as, do you think you could look good in that blonde hair? Maybe next week that should be a new look for you. It's full on blonde with the new tan. I think that's a good look for Jay Morrison.
I would not go full on blonde, but I will admit that back in my mullet days, I would use a little peroxide and kind of bleach out the tips of the mullet and have kind of like the brown to blonde look. And it was probably not a smart decision, but
I had frosted tips once upon I was born in the height of, grew up in the height of boy band era. Come on. I was 10 years old in 2000. Of course,
I'm going to need to see a picture of that.
Oh, those. Hopefully, my parents have buried those by now, but I'm not sure whether those exist. That's an interesting look for Mr. Burrow. Yeah, well, I'm sure there will be a lot of reaction on that. I already see 400 replies, and it was tweeted 10 minutes ago. So
Yeah.
there's already a lot of comments on that. Yeah. Maybe we'll talk more about that haircut when we come back next week. But that's it for us on today's show. We're glad to be back. Everyone enjoyed training camp. Football's here again. Bengals are back. We'll be back next week to talk more Bengals football. Thanks again for listening.